الحضور الكرام، أولى جلسات هذا المؤتمر للسيد كيث نيوتن، وهو الأمين العام للمعهد الملكي البريطاني للنقل واللوجستيات بالمملكة المتحدة. يتحدث السيد كيث نيوتن عن احتراف سلسلة الإمداد بأداء متميز.
Good morning, distinguished guests, delegates and sponsors. It is good to be in Riyadh. This is my second time here, and I bring you greetings from the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport from around the world. It's my pleasure to be part of this conference. When I last came a couple of years ago, I spoke on the demand-driven world, and today I'm intending to just spend about 35 minutes speaking on how to be a top-performing professional. So, the objective of this opening session is to give you a few things to think about. I've looked at the program. It's a very international program. You've got people from different aspects of the supply chain speaking. You've got people from government. You've got people from local industries, from CEOs at a senior level. And you've also got people from around the world and talking about issues around the world. And that's the context in which we work today as supply chain professionals. So I hope by the end of my 30 minutes you'll have a few things that you can apply in your own particular aspect of the profession. It will be fitting, I think, to start with a quote from Steve Jobs. Now, this is quite a pertinent quote from a gentleman who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple, said, "Becoming the richest man in the cemetery is not what matters. To me, going to bed at night saying we've done something wonderful is what matters." So going to bed at night and saying we've done something wonderful is what matters. And that's the essence of what I want to talk to you about this morning. So I'm not setting myself up as a top performing supply chain professional. That wouldn't be my right, and it's probably not true. But I want to emphasize the we rather than the I, the we rather than the me in what you hear this morning. And just to give you a little insight, so I've been the Secretary General of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport now for just over 6 years. Been in a very privileged position because I've had the chance I work every day with people around the globe. I get the chance to do some travel. But my background really is a supply chain operator. So I've run warehouses, I've run factories, I've been responsible for supply chain in the food industry mainly. So you understand a little bit about where I come from. I'm a practitioner, and the thoughts that I give this morning will play into that context. Why do I say we? Well, I think the team is a critical part in terms of performance. I don't know whether you're aware, but or many of you follow golf, but we had in France a few weeks ago an event, the Ryder Cup. You may have seen some of the pictures, and just a little example there about team. 1 + 1 = 3 or more than 3. The Ryder Cup is unique in that there's not many competitions in golf that involve the team. It's America against Europe. America had, of their 12 players, had 11 in the top 20 in the world, and Europe, of their 12 players, had 6. The American team had a team that had won 30 majors, and the European team had a team that had won 6 majors. So on the face of it, it should have been a fairly easy victory to the American team. But they proved that 1 + 1 equals 3, and the European team won 17.5, 10.5. So just a little illustration of how, for me, in the supply chain, it's all about us rather than all about me. And this morning, just quickly in the time that I've got allotted, I want to talk about these dimensions of what does winning now and particularly in the future in the supply chain. So there's a number of factors here that come in: internationalism, professional skills, adaptability. I've talked about the team. Being prepared to fail. That's the other thing as supply chain professionals. Now, think back in your career. You will remember probably fondly times when you've succeeded, but remember also times when you've failed. So when I look back at it as a profession, in my early days, I took over a failing distribution centre. The management team of 6 people, 5 of them had been fired, and I joined Cadbury in that context. Within a year, we turned that distribution centre round. I remember that with fondness. I equally remember later in my Cadbury career being the global process director for customer to cash, putting in a global SAP project. This was going to be a single instance SAP project, and we chose Australia as being the Australian drinks business in Cadbury Schweppes as being the place we would start. And we went live. And within 2 weeks, we were struggling to deliver to no more than 25% of our customers. It took us 6 months before we delivered successfully to every customer we had. That was a huge failure from a business viewpoint. It was quoted on the stock exchange. I was the person responsible for the processes that failed. But fortunately, I stayed within the business for another 10 years. So failure is as important as success as a supply chain professional. You need to understand how you deal with failure, how you learn from failure, and particularly how you position failure in your career. So it's not all about success. I also want to cover what I think are changing dimensions. So I've been a member of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport for 30 plus years. When I started, I was a member in the Institute of Logistics. Logistics was a fairly new term then in the industry. And over the course of that time, supply chain has happened. So when you look now another 30 years out, there will be a lot of change that will happen. We've got some emerging technologies. We'll cover that within the program during the 2 days that we're around. What's very important is the supply chain is becoming more important for businesses and more important for the world. And an integrated approach is much more critical than it was when I started 30 years ago. Functional approaches are for the past. Integrated business approaches are for the future. And as a supply chain professional, you need to be equipped to be able to deal in that environment in a business, with your fellow people in commercial, in finance, be able to work in an integrated fashion. As you progress through your careers, its influencing supply chain will have more influence on boards. And I put this slide in. Professor Richard Wilding is the chairman of CILT, the Chartered Institute in the UK, and also the professor of supply chain at Cranfield University. Social supply chain management. Much well understood and creeping into our supply chain world in terms of the great opportunities for bringing information through apps and through social media into what historically have been largely ERP-based systems that we work with. And I threw that up there. The Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport is a charity. So I work part-time as a delivery driver for DPD. That's not true. That's not true. But this is the social media experience we get in the UK, and you may well get something similar here in Saudi and the Middle East, where on my phone will come up a message that the driver is about to deliver me a parcel. And I will be able to track that driver on the app right to my front door. So social media already being used by many businesses in this fast-moving, demanding world. Let's just have a look at the international dimension, because I think this is very important for this conference and for you in Saudi Arabia. So you sit almost in the middle of the CILT world. We've got 35 countries now, very much with a Eurasia spread. And that is the way the geography of the world is moving. Moving very much towards the east. The balance of power in those starting off in your careers now, the balance of power is moving further east. And it's very critical that as supply chain professionals that we have that ability to understand culture and to work across culture. Very critical, equally, that we recognize that best practice won't necessarily come from the competing business next door, but could come from many thousands of miles away. This culture and this ability to network and to pick up best practice from all parts of the world is absolutely critical for anybody who's starting out in the supply chain, or in your mid-career, or even in your late career. You need to develop ways of working with this. I'll give you a little illustration. So China, this is a cultural illustration. China, very different to work with. I've only started experience working with the Chinese in my current role, but I've been working with them for 6 years. I went about a month ago to talk about a very significant education project in China. Coming from a UK background, coming from a Western corporate background, I wasn't prepared to go until I had a business plan. And I was talking to them for about 6 months about having a proper business plan about the proposal. My colleagues in China were saying they don't want a business plan. They do not want a business plan. They want to see you. They want you in China. And eventually I got it and I went across. And when you work in a culture like the Chinese culture, it's very much about relationships. It's a very different way. They don't say no in many instances. And their yeses come through their social interaction. So yes, very important for a project still to have a business plan, but equally understand the cultures that you're working in, and as professionals be prepared to look, learn, and get involved with other nationalities and other cultures. So just a check-in terms of where we've got to. I've talked about internationalism. I want to talk more about two things on this slide, really. Risk and professional skills. I've covered prepare to fail, so always be prepared to fail. And I'll cover the other dimension of that as I talk in a minute about risk. So, management of risk. That's the other thing in supply chain. Things always go wrong. They will go wrong. You can get supply chain examples every day of the week across the world where significant projects have gone wrong. We had KFC recently. Apologies to any DHL participant in the audience, but this unfortunately has gone down as a supply chain classic story. So KFC switched their third-party logistics provider from a business called Bidvest in the UK to a business called DHL. DHL decided to do it through one national distribution centre to replace two that Bidvest were operating through. Within 2 weeks of starting the new contract, and they won this contract for an extended period of time, within 2 weeks, you couldn't get any chicken in KFC. You could only get chicken in 30% of the branches. They did a very good line in lemon wipes, hand wipes, and they did a very good line in Pepsi. But if you can't get your chicken when you go into KFC, it's a major stumbling block. And those sort of illustrations are an illustration of really, you don't want to be in that position, and you can avoid getting into that position if you properly risk manage when you go into things. You need accountability at a personal level. You need team ownership, and don't be a victim. So the supply chain mentality historically is often to, well, let's see what happens, and let's be a hero after the event when we come in and sort out the mess. Try and avoid that mess to start with. I've got some experience here in my manufacturing career. We had 3 sites, goes back 10 years or so, but 3 sites where we had flood, fire, and what we call pestilence. So we had a famous, in terms of global instances, a famous salmonella issue with our chocolate brand about 10 years ago. And if you've been in, this is just flicking through, but this is our Sheffield factory. So on the left is where we made all the Maynard's wine gums for the whole of the United Kingdom. There was a flood, and that was the manufacturing plant on the right-hand side. That's the water from the river that overflowed coming out of our warehouse. So catastrophic. That is an example of risk which is difficult to manage, but still could have been managed in a better way. The river that ran alongside the Sheffield factory, which produced all the sugar confectionery, so products like Jelly Babies, if you're aware of those, wine gums for Cadbury in the UK and further afield, was in Sheffield. And there was a river that ran alongside that Sheffield factory. That river had a predicted, once in every 200 years, it was likely that river would flood and impact the factory. And we'd actually got that statistic, and we didn't believe it would happen. But it did happen, and you can see the results. The manufacturing plant particularly, you can recover in warehouses, you lose stock and you recover, but the manufacturing plant particularly took us 6 months to get that manufacturing plant back up and running. And these sort of stories mean that as supply chain professionals, we have to take risk into account. I've got quite a few photos here of floating goods and the scale of the cleanup. So just an illustration, when you look at, I spoke about the international dimensions that we come across in the supply chain. Of course, there is far more risk when you look at the interdependent nature of our world today. And as supply chain professionals, that is something we have got to be acutely aware of. Across international boundaries, other factors that we can't be in control of, but need assessment, and as supply chain professionals, we need to be leading with our finance colleagues in how we approach those things as a business. Road deaths. What's the most risky? When I go to Nigeria, It's not about, they tell me that I should take malaria tablets when I go and visit Nigeria, as I have done a few times in my role. Actually, road traffic accidents is far more likely to kill me or injure me when I'm in Nigeria. And as professionals, this is something that I'm fervently, because we have a lot of interaction with our African colleagues. I haven't seen enough of the driving here to know it's probably not on the African dimensions. I'm certain it isn't. But as professionals, we need to be in that sphere. And this is a little example of risk. This is me a year ago in Pakistan. Now, they took risk seriously. I said to them, well, are there any safety issues in going to Pakistan? They provided me with a team, a heavily armed team. In this viewpoint, I can tell you, so everywhere I went, there was a police car in front, a police car behind, flashing lights, and these guys with their guns. You couldn't have asked for a better way to highlight the fact that I was around. So sometimes don't, just think about what you're doing. It's not necessary to manage risk with an overt, in this case, an overt show of force. And then I wanted to finish on professional skills because this is right at the heart of my organisation, the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. In transport and in logistics, it's all about people. And as supply chain professionals, we talked earlier about, I touched on team. It's all about equipping your team and being very conscious of your people. And success is success for you must be about how you manage, how you operate, and how you lead your people. Communication is key. Again, as part of my career, I closed 2 factories. They were the factories I was responsible for. I had 700 people who had worked for me for 3 to 5 years. And what we did was actually appoint communication people. I had a communication person who I lifted out in each of those factories. Communication when you're talking to your people. Succession. Think about your successor. Don't think about that positive. Do think about that positively. Don't think about that negatively. Diversity in the supply chain. Surround yourself with the skills that you do not have. So again, in a factory, I'm not technically competent. I don't have a great lot of strengths in IT, but I've worked a lot in IT projects. Surround yourself in that situation with people who do know. If you're an IT specialist, surround yourself with people who can train and communicate the processes and the use of IT. In the Institute, logistics skills is very critical for us. We've undertaken a project looking at globally at logistics skills. I know this is a key area in Saudi and the Middle East. We did a study with the Kurna Logistics University and with the World Bank. We've got a toolkit that we've prepared from that. And basically, across the world, that study identified that skills shortages are critical within the supply chain. Difficulty in recruiting people into the industry with the right level of skills. So logistics still, in many countries, doesn't get a focus, is not a career of choice. We have to change that. And then the skill of our existing logistics employees doesn't have focus or commitment, financial commitment to improve. So supply chain professionals in our workplace, We have to be on top of that. If you work in any government role, very critical looking out here, logistics will be a critical part for the Saudi economy, for the whole of the Middle East. Have you the people who can fill those important jobs and roles? We're working as an institute in Kazakhstan. We've only gone in there 18 months ago, and we're now working across the other stands in terms of with a number of different parties in terms of where Kazakhstan is, we're absolutely on the Belt and Road. Logistics will form 20% plus of their workforce, and they need qualified people, and qualified being the operative word. So very critical for us to look at the skills challenge in our jobs and how we equip the people who work for us. In the Institute, we have a format in terms of professional membership. We link that to both skills and experience, and that's a format that I'd encourage you as logistics to look at. The other supply chain institutes such as SIPS have a similar setup, but recognize that going forward, it's not just about experience, it's about skills and knowledge as well as experience. And on the right-hand side, you see something about mentoring. Mentoring is a critical part now of the Institute. I mentor somebody in the armed forces in the UK as part of CRT UK's approach to professional development. So learn from others as well as seeking to get your own professional knowledge. And we have, as an individual, if you're interested in terms of looking about your own continuous professional development, we encourage within our members a review on an annual basis in terms of what do I need to do to improve my own particular skills. So this is where I'm going into this at an individual level. And I would encourage you, if you want any more information on that, come and see me, look on the website. So your personal plan for success, just to finish up in terms of professional skills and being a top performing supply chain professional, I'd look at it very simply. Look at it in two ways. What do I need to win in my current role? And how can I take the next steps from a career viewpoint, which may or may not be with your current business. Most of us will move several times in our career. There's a different structure in there. Be holistic in the way you think. So at both dimensions, in your current role and in any future role, think about the family. Think about your personal goals. Think about your beliefs, because we are whole people. So if you find yourself being narrowed down in a way that impacts those other aspects of your life, then take a rain check and do something about it. And I put that number one. And then it varies as you go through, but in each dimension where you're thinking about, well, how do I succeed in the job that I'm doing? You've got to think about your people. Have you got the right people? Are you equipping your people? Are you using your people effectively? Your boss, you've got to manage upwards as well as downwards. Your network and your own personal development. And then there's some slightly different variations. Thank you. So I leave that with you just simply as something that you can start to structure your thoughts about your own individual professional development. I want to finish actually to announce something on behalf of our partners. We work with the Middle East Logistics, MELI, which are very much part of this conference. We've worked with MELI for now certainly all my time in my current role in the Institute. Goes back 10, 12 years. And MELI provide our certificate, which is the base international certificate, which is our base qualification, and then the diploma and the advanced diploma. I'm very excited to really say that we now with Melly, I've just lost the slide, not sure how that happened. There we are. So the Human Resources Development Fund and the TVTC have joined in terms of giving us initial approval for young Saudis to be funded through taking the International Certificate Program in Logistics and Transport. A base course in terms of the context of today. This will enable more young Saudis to be equipped in logistics and transport. So we're very excited from an institute viewpoint, very excited from a Melly viewpoint, and we wanted to share that with you this morning. So I'm going to sit down now. My time is up. I hope I've left you a few thoughts. I will be with you for the next couple of days. And tomorrow I take part in that blockchain discussion in the afternoon. So there's a tremendous program here. It's great to be with so many supply chain professionals. For me, it's great to be here in Saudi just to understand a little bit more about your challenges. So I hope I learn a lot more about the next couple of days. You enjoy it, and all the best to each of you in your future supply chain careers. Thank you very much.